Translate this and my salary will be yours, says the millionaire who snubbed the poor 6-year-old daughter of the janitor. She saved $1 billion by reading the clause that no one saw in the contract. Before we dive into the story, drop a comment below and tell us where you're watching from. Enjoy the story. The marble floors of Sterling Industries' executive building gleamed under the harsh fluorescent lights as 6-year-old Emma Martinez clutched her worn teddy bear tighter. Her father, Miguel, pushed his janitor's cart through the corridors at 7 p.m., long after the important people had gone home. But tonight was different. Tonight, the most important man in the building was still there. Richard Sterling, worth $3 billion and counting, stood in his corner office overlooking downtown Chicago. His Italian suit probably cost more than Miguel made in 3 months. Emma had wandered away from her father's cleaning supplies, drawn by the massive fish tank that dominated one wall of the office. "Pretty fishies," she whispered, her small hands pressed against the glass. "What the hell is this?" Sterling's voice cut through the silence like a blade. He turned from his window, his grey eyes cold as winter steel. "Miguel, get in here now." Miguel appeared in the doorway, his face already flushed with embarrassment. "Mr. Sterling, I'm so sorry. Emma, come away from there." But Emma wasn't listening. She was staring at the papers scattered across Sterling's massive oak desk. Her young mind, sharp as a tack despite her circumstances, had learned to read early. Very early. And something on those papers had caught her attention. "The fish looks sad," Emma said softly, still looking at the tank. "Like the numbers on your papers. They don't match." Sterling's laugh was harsh and mocking. "Numbers? Listen here, you little street rat. These are legal documents worth more money than your family will ever see. Complex contracts that require Harvard law degrees to understand. Not fairy tales about sad fish." Miguel stepped forward, his voice humble but protective. "Emma, come on, let's go finish cleaning the hallway." But Emma turned around, her dark eyes meeting Sterling's intimidating gaze without flinching. "I can read the big words too, mister. My mama taught me before she went to heaven. That paper says subsidiary clause, and the numbers are wrong." Sterling's face darkened. He bent down to Emma's level, his voice dripping with condescension. "You want to know what I think about your reading skills, little girl? Translate this for me." He pulled out his wallet and threw a $20 bill on the floor. "My salary will be yours if you can actually prove you understand what you're talking about." The money fluttered to the ground between them. Emma looked at it, then back at Sterling's sneering face. Her father's hand found her shoulder, gentle but firm. "We don't need your money, Mr. Sterling," Miguel said quietly. "We have our dignity." Sterling straightened up, his smile cruel. "Dignity doesn't pay the bills, Miguel, and your daughter's fantasies about reading contracts won't either. Keep her away from my office. Some people need to learn their place in this world." As father and daughter walked away, Emma whispered just loud enough for Sterling to hear. "The clause in Section 47 has the wrong beneficiary listed. It says subsidiary, but it should say parent company. That mistake could cost you everything." Sterling's laughter echoed through the empty corridors. "Everything? From a 6-year-old janitor's daughter? That's rich." But something in Emma's words sent a chill down his spine. He looked back at the contract on his desk. Section 47. He'd signed it that morning without reading it thoroughly. A $1 billion acquisition deal with overseas implications. The numbers, the subsidiary clause. His hand trembled slightly as he reached for the document. 2 days later, Richard Sterling sat in his lawyer's office, his face pale as parchment. Attorney Harold Whitman, a man who'd never lost a case in 30 years, was stammering like a first-year law student. The mahogany walls of the prestigious law firm seemed to close in around them as the magnitude of their error became clear. "Richard, I don't know how we missed this. The subsidiary clause in Section 47. Whitman's hands shook as he held the contract, his usually steady voice cracking under the pressure. "It designates the wrong entity as the beneficiary. Instead of Sterling Industries receiving the overseas assets, they'll go to Nakamura Corp's subsidiary in Tokyo." Sterling's voice was barely a whisper, his empire crumbling around him with each word. "How much are we talking about, Harold?" "The preliminary assessment." Whitman loosened his tie, sweat beading on his forehead despite the air conditioning. We're looking at a loss of approximately $1 billion in assets and future earnings. The contract is ironclad, Richard. We signed it and it's already been filed with international regulatory bodies in 3 countries. Sterling's mind flashed back to Emma's words, echoing like a prophecy. That mistake could cost you everything. A 6-year-old girl had spotted what Harvard-trained lawyers, with their combined century of experience, had completely missed. The irony was suffocating. There has to be a way to fix this, Sterling said, his voice desperate as he gripped the edge of the conference table. We can't just hand over $1 billion because of a typo. Whitman shook his head grimly, his expression that of a doctor delivering terminal news. The Japanese are already moving to claim the assets. They're calling it a gift from American incompetence. Their lawyers are ruthless, Richard. Unless we can prove gross negligence or fraud on their part, we're legally bound to honor every word of this contract. Sterling stood up abruptly, his chair clattering behind him as rage and panic warred in his chest. Get me every lawyer in the firm, now. Cancel all their other cases. This is priority 1. He paused at the door, his hand trembling on the handle. And Harold, find out everything you can about Miguel Martinez and his daughter. Everything. Meanwhile, in their cramped 2-bedroom apartment above Mrs. Chen's laundromat, Emma sat at their tiny kitchen table, the surface scarred from years of use. She was helping her father count the week's earnings under the flickering fluorescent light that buzzed like an angry bee. $47.32. Enough for rent, rice, and beans. Maybe some milk if they were very lucky. Papa, why was that man so mean to us? Emma asked, her small fingers organizing the crumpled bills with the precision of a banker. Her dark eyes held a wisdom that seemed far too old for her 6 years. Miguel sighed deeply, his weathered hands gentle as he stroked his daughter's hair. Years of manual labor had left calluses on his palms, but his touch was tender. Some people think money makes them better than others, Mika. But your mama always said intelligence is the only currency that really matters in this world. Mama was smart like me, wasn't she? Emma's voice carried a note of longing that broke her father's heart. Miguel's eyes filled with tears he tried to hide. Smarter, mi amor. She could have been anything she wanted. A lawyer, a doctor, a teacher. She had offers from the biggest companies in Chicago. But she chose to be your mama instead, and she made me promise to help you become everything she never got the chance to be. Emma looked up at her father with those impossibly wise eyes. I'm going to be rich someday, Papa. Not mean rich like that man, but good rich, so we can help other people who clean floors and count crumpled dollar bills. Neither of them noticed the black sedan parked across the street, its occupant taking photographs through a telephoto lens. Sterling's private investigator, Marcus Webb, was thorough and ruthless. Within 24 hours, he'd compiled a dossier that would have impressed the CIA. He sat across from Sterling in the executive conference room, his findings spread across the polished table like evidence in a murder trial. The morning sun streamed through floor-to-ceiling windows, casting long shadows across the documents. Miguel Martinez, age 34, widowed. Wife died of pancreatic cancer 18 months ago after a brutal 8-month battle. He's worked as a janitor here for 4 years, exemplary record. Never missed a day, never complained about overtime without pay, never filed a single grievance despite working in conditions that would break most men. Sterling barely glanced at Miguel's file, his attention focused elsewhere. What about the girl? That's what I need to know. Emma Martinez, age 6. This is where your story gets interesting, Mr. Sterling. Webb pulled out a stack of school records, psychological evaluations, and test scores. She's been tested by the Chicago public school system 3 times in the past year. Her IQ is off the charts. We're talking potential genius level, but she's been held back from advanced programs because of behavioral issues. Sterling leaned forward, his interest piqued. What kind of behavioral issues? She corrects her teachers constantly, points out errors in textbooks, challenges curriculum, refuses to participate in activities she considers intellectually insulting. The school psychologist notes she shows classic signs of what they call gifted child syndrome, profound frustration with authority figures who she perceives as intellectually inferior. Sterling's jaw tightened. He recognized that particular form of arrogance. What about her educational background at home? Webb flipped through several pages, his expression growing more serious. Here's where it gets complicated, sir. Emma's been homeschooled in advanced subjects by her mother since age 3. We're talking calculus, multiple languages, legal terminology. The child's academic foundation is extraordinary. And the mother? Sterling's voice was carefully controlled. Webb's expression grew grave. Maria Santos Martinez. Here's where your story takes a dramatic turn, sir. She wasn't just some cleaning lady who happened to be smart. She graduated summa cum laude from Northwestern University with a degree in international business law. Full scholarship. She was hired straight out of law school by Patterson & Associates. Sterling's blood ran cold. Patterson & Associates was one of the top 3 corporate law firms in Chicago, specializing in international contracts. What happened to her career? She got pregnant with Emma during her 2nd year at the firm. No husband initially, no family support system. She was forced to choose between partnership track and single motherhood. She chose Emma. Webb's voice carried a note of respect. She worked 3 jobs to support them both: legal research at night, translation services on weekends, and cleaning offices. That's where she met Miguel. Sterling stood and walked to the window, his reflection ghostly in the glass. The city sprawled below him, but he felt like he was falling. So Emma comes by her intelligence naturally. More than that, sir. Maria Martinez specialized in international contract law during her time at Patterson & Associates. She spent her final year there working exclusively on subsidiary clauses and overseas asset transfers. The exact type of contract you signed with Nakamura Corp. The silence in the room was deafening. Sterling finally spoke, his voice barely audible. Are you telling me that a 6-year-old girl learned about contract law from her mother? I'm telling you that Emma Martinez has been raised by 2 parents who understood exactly what she was looking at when she saw your contract. And, sir? Webb hesitated, consulting his notes. There's something else. Maria Martinez died clutching a letter she'd written to Emma. The hospital staff said it was about seeing opportunities that others miss and never being afraid to speak truth to power, regardless of the consequences. Sterling's hands clenched into fists. The irony was crushing. He'd dismissed Emma as a street rat, while she carried the intellectual legacy of one of Chicago's most promising young lawyers. The following week brought news that would have destroyed lesser men. Sterling Industries' stock plummeted 30% in 3 days, wiping out millions in market value. The financial press was having a field day, running headlines like the billion-dollar blunder and how Harvard lawyers got schooled by a 6-year-old. Business magazines featured Sterling's photograph with the cruel caption, "The arrogant billionaire who couldn't read his own contract." Sterling hadn't slept in 72 hours. His office had become a war room, surrounded by empty coffee cups, crumpled papers, and the debris of a crumbling empire. Legal briefs covered every surface, and his usually immaculate appearance was disheveled. His tie hung loose, his shirt wrinkled, his eyes bloodshot from exhaustion and stress. His assistant buzzed through the intercom, her voice tight with tension. "Mr. Sterling, there's an urgent problem with the Martinez family." Sterling's head snapped up from the contract he'd been studying for the 100th time. "What kind of problem?" "Miguel Martinez was terminated this morning. Corporate says it was budget cuts, but the timing." She left the sentence hanging, but both knew the implications. Sterling's rage exploded like a volcano. Who authorized this? Who had the audacity to fire that man without consulting me? The board of directors held an emergency meeting at 6 a.m. They're saying his daughter's interference with company business created a liability issue. They're concerned about corporate espionage, about the family having access to sensitive information. Sterling was already reaching for his phone, his fingers dialing before his assistant finished speaking. "Get me the head of HR now. And patch me through to every board member. I want them in this office within the hour." But it was too late. The damage was spreading like cancer through Sterling's carefully constructed world. His board was questioning his competence. His competitors were circling like vultures sensing weakness, and the media was painting him as the arrogant billionaire who'd been outsmarted by a child from the wrong side of Chicago. Meanwhile, Emma sat in their apartment, watching her father pack his few possessions from the janitor's closet into a cardboard box. Miguel's shoulders were slumped in defeat, his pride shattered by the humiliation of being escorted from the building by security guards who'd known him for years. "Papa, it's because of me, isn't it?" Emma asked quietly, her voice carrying a weight of guilt that no 6-year-old should bear. Miguel knelt beside his daughter, taking her small hands in his calloused ones. "No, mija. It's because some people can't admit when they're wrong. They'd rather destroy innocent people than face the truth about their own mistakes. But you know what? Your mama would be proud of you for speaking the truth, even when it was difficult." Emma's eyes filled with determination that would have impressed generals. "I'm going to fix this, Papa. I'm going to make that mean man understand that he needs us more than we need him." That evening, Emma did something that would have terrified most adults. She picked up their apartment's old rotary phone, the one with the frayed cord and the numbers worn smooth by years of use, and dialed the number she'd memorized from the business card she'd seen on Sterling's desk. "Sterling Industries, Executive Offices. How may I direct your call?" "I need to speak to Mr. Sterling," Emma said in her clear, precise voice. "Tell him Emma Martinez has information about his contract that could save his company from bankruptcy." The receptionist paused, recognizing the name from the news stories that had been dominating Chicago's business section. "Please hold while I locate Mr. Sterling." 3 minutes later, Richard Sterling's voice came through the receiver, strained and desperate. "Emma, is that really you?" "Yes, Mr. Sterling. I want to make a deal with you. A deal that will save your company and give my papa his dignity back." Sterling's penthouse apartment overlooked Lake Michigan, but the breathtaking view might as well have been a brick wall. He paced frantically across the marble floors, his bare feet silent against the cold stone, while Emma's words echoed in his mind. "I want to make a deal with you." The city lights twinkled below like stars, but Sterling saw only darkness ahead. He'd agreed to meet with her and Miguel the next morning, but his pride was warring with his desperation. How had it come to this? How was he, a man who'd built a $3 billion empire from nothing, about to negotiate with a 6-year-old girl from the projects? His phone rang at midnight, the sharp sound cutting through the silence. It was Harold Whitman, his voice tight with panic. "Richard, I have an update on the Nakamura situation. They're accelerating their timeline. They want to take possession of the Tokyo assets by the end of the month. If we can't find a legal out by then, we're looking at complete bankruptcy." Sterling closed his eyes, feeling the weight of 3 decades of work crashing down on him. "What about the other options we discussed? The appeals, the international arbitration?" "We've explored everything. Fraud claims, procedural errors, international law violations. Nothing sticks. The contract is legally sound except for that one clause, and ironically, that clause benefits them perfectly. It's almost like—" Whitman paused. "Like what?" "Like someone with inside knowledge of our contracting process deliberately sabotaged the deal, but that's impossible, right?" Sterling thought about Maria Martinez's background, her expertise in international contract law, her daughter's impossible knowledge of legal terminology. "Harold, what if it's not impossible? What if we could prove the error was intentional? Do you have evidence of that?" Sterling stared at his reflection in the window, seeing a broken man he barely recognized. "I might, but it's going to require me to do something I've never done before." "What's that?" "Admit I was wrong, completely, utterly wrong." The next morning, Miguel and Emma sat in Sterling's conference room, looking impossibly small in the massive leather chairs that had been designed to intimidate. Emma had insisted on wearing her best dress, a faded blue thing that her mother had sewn by hand during the final months of her life, when chemotherapy had left her too weak to work, but determined to leave her daughter something beautiful. Sterling entered with his legal team trailing behind him like pallbearers. He looked haggard, his usually perfect appearance disheveled, his $3,000 suit wrinkled from a sleepless night. "Emma," he began, his voice carefully controlled but carrying undertones of desperation. "I understand you believe you can help with my contract situation." Emma nodded seriously, her dark eyes meeting his without flinching. "I've been thinking about it every night since we met, Mr. Sterling. The problem isn't just the subsidiary clause. There are 3 other errors in the contract that nobody noticed because they were looking for big mistakes instead of small ones." The lawyers exchanged glances. Sterling leaned forward, his heart pounding. "What kind of errors?" "The decimal point in Section 12 is in the wrong place. The interest calculation in Section 23 uses the wrong formula for compound interest, and the signature date on page 47 doesn't match the signature date on page 12. Emma's voice was steady and matter-of-fact, as if she were discussing the weather. Harold Whitman grabbed the contract with trembling hands, his expensive fountain pen scratching across the pages as he verified each claim. Dear God, she's right. How did we miss this? How did 3 law firms miss this? Emma's voice was patient, like a teacher explaining something obvious to a slow student. Because you were looking for big mistakes. Sometimes the smallest errors cause the biggest problems. My mama taught me that contracts are like recipes. If you put in the wrong ingredients, the whole thing tastes bad. Sterling stared at the little girl across from him, this extraordinary child who held his future in her small hands. Emma, do you understand what you're saying? If you're right, this contract might be voidable due to multiple clerical errors. I know, Emma said simply, but I want something in return. What do you want? Emma looked at her father, then back at Sterling with an expression far too mature for her years. I want my papa's job back with an apology. I want a college fund for my education so I can become a lawyer like Mama wanted. And I want you to promise that you'll never treat people badly, just because they clean floors instead of sitting in fancy offices. Sterling felt something crack inside his chest, a wall he'd built around his heart 30 years ago. And if I agree to these terms? Emma smiled for the first time since he'd met her, and it was like sunrise after the longest night. Then I'll help you save your company, but not because you're paying me, because it's the right thing to do. That afternoon, Emma sat in Sterling's office, the billion-dollar contract spread before her like a treasure map. She'd asked for crayons and paper, and now she was drawing diagrams that would have impressed law school professors. Her small hands moved with precision, creating colorful charts that explained complex legal concepts in ways that even Sterling could understand. See, Mr. Sterling, she said, pointing to her artwork with the tip of a red crayon, the contract has what Mama called cascading errors. One mistake leads to another, and then another. It's like dominoes falling down. Once the first one tips over, they all fall in a pattern. Sterling watched in amazement as Emma explained international contract law using simple analogies that made more sense than anything his lawyers had told him. Your mama taught you about cascading errors? Emma nodded solemnly, her expression growing sad. She said contracts are like recipes. If you put in the wrong ingredients, the whole thing tastes bad. But if you can find where the recipe went wrong, sometimes you can still fix it before it's too late. Harold Whitman burst through the office doors, his face flushed with excitement, and his usually perfect hair disheveled. Richard, I've been on the phone with our international law experts for 3 hours. Emma's analysis is absolutely brilliant. The multiple errors create what's called contract ambiguity under international law. When a contract contains contradictory information, it can be nullified or renegotiated. Sterling felt hope for the first time in weeks, a warm sensation spreading through his chest. Can we actually use this to void the contract? We're already drafting the emergency motion. Emma, you may have just saved Sterling Industries from bankruptcy. Whitman's voice carried genuine admiration as he looked at the little girl who'd accomplished what his entire legal team couldn't. But Emma wasn't celebrating. She was staring at a photograph on Sterling's desk, a picture of him shaking hands with Japanese businessmen at the contract signing ceremony. Her brow was furrowed in concentration, as if she were solving a puzzle that only she could see. Mr. Sterling, she said quietly, her voice carrying a weight that made both men lean forward. I need to tell you something very important about my mama. Sterling knelt beside her chair, his expensive suit forgotten. What is it, Emma? Mama worked on a contract like this before when I was little. She told me about it when she was very sick and couldn't sleep at night. She said she found mistakes in a big company's paperwork, but when she told her bosses, they fired her instead of thanking her. Sterling's blood ran cold, a chill spreading through his veins like ice water. What company, Emma, do you remember? She never told me the name, but she said the bosses were mean men who threw money on the floor and told her she'd never understand important papers because she was just a poor girl from the wrong side of town. Emma's eyes met his, and Sterling saw his own cruelty reflected back at him. She said she wrote down everything she knew about contracts in a special notebook, so that someday someone like me could use it to help good people fight back against bullies. The silence in the room was deafening. Sterling realized he was looking at the daughter of a woman he'd perhaps wronged years ago. A brilliant lawyer who'd been dismissed, forgotten, and ultimately destroyed by the very system she'd tried to improve. "Emma," he whispered, his voice breaking, "I think your mama was trying to prepare you for this exact moment." Emma nodded solemnly, her small hands folded in her lap. "She said that sometimes God puts us in places where we can help people who don't deserve it, because maybe helping them will make them better people. She said that's what real justice looks like." Sterling felt tears he hadn't shed in 20 years building behind his eyes. "And you believe I can become a better person?" "I believe anyone can change, Mr. Sterling. Even you, but you have to want to change. You have to be sorry for the people you've hurt." As the sun set over Chicago, painting the sky in shades of gold and crimson, Sterling looked at this remarkable little girl who held his future in her small hands and realized that saving his company might be the least important thing that would happen in this room today. Sterling stood in his office at midnight, staring at a photograph he'd pulled from his personal files. It was from 6 years ago, a company celebration where he'd been awarded Executive of the Year by Chicago Business Weekly. In the background, barely visible, was a young woman in a cleaning uniform, emptying trash cans while the powerful people celebrated. Maria Martinez. He remembered her now with crushing clarity. She'd approached him that night, her voice trembling with nervous excitement. "Mr. Sterling, I noticed an error in the Henderson contract, the subsidiary clause," but he'd cut her off with a dismissive wave, annoyed that a cleaning lady had interrupted his moment of triumph. "Listen, sweetheart," he'd said, loud enough for others to hear and laugh. "I don't pay you to think. I pay you to empty trash cans. Stick to what you know." The humiliation in her eyes had been complete. She'd stepped back, clutching her cleaning supplies, and whispered, "I'm sorry, sir, I just thought." "Don't think," he'd snapped. "People like you don't have thoughts worth hearing." Now, 6 years later, Sterling realized the truth. Maria Martinez had been trying to save him from the exact same type of error that was now destroying his company. She'd seen the Henderson contract's flaws, but he'd been too arrogant to listen. That contract had cost Sterling Industries $50 million in the end, a loss he'd blamed on his legal team's incompetence. His phone rang. It was Marcus Webb, his private investigator. "Mr. Sterling, I've been digging deeper into Maria Martinez's background. You need to know something. After she was humiliated at your company party, she didn't just quit. She was blacklisted from every major law firm in Chicago. Word spread that she'd overstepped her boundaries with a prominent client." Sterling's knees gave out. He sank into his chair, the weight of his cruelty crushing him. "How do you know this?" "I found her former supervisor at Patterson and Associates. Maria Martinez was brilliant, sir. She could have been one of the best contract lawyers in the country. Instead, she spent her final years cleaning toilets at night and caring for her sick daughter during the day, all because she tried to help you." The line went quiet. Sterling stared at Emma's colorful diagrams on his desk, seeing them now as more than just legal analysis. They were a daughter's tribute to her mother's destroyed dreams. "Mr. Sterling," Webb's voice was gentle, "there's something else. Maria Martinez left behind more than just notebooks. She left behind a video message for Emma. The hospital gave it to Miguel after she died." Sterling's voice was barely a whisper. "What did she say?" "She told Emma that someday she'd meet people who would try to make her feel small because of where she came from. She said that when that happened, Emma should remember that intelligence and kindness are more powerful than money and pride. She said that helping people who've hurt you is the greatest victory of all." Sterling hung up the phone and wept for the first time in 30 years. He wept for Maria Martinez, for the career he'd destroyed, for the woman who'd died, knowing her daughter would have to fight the same battles she'd lost. But mostly he wept for the man he'd become, a man so consumed with power that he'd crushed the very people trying to help him. Emma was right. Change was possible, but it would require him to face the full weight of his sins. The next morning brought devastating news. Sterling sat in his boardroom, surrounded by men in expensive suits who'd once called him a visionary. Now they looked at him like he was a disease they needed to cut out before it spread. Board Chairman William Hartley, a man Sterling had considered a friend for 20 years, led the attack. "Richard, this company cannot survive another week of this embarrassment. A 6-year-old child is making international headlines about our incompetence. Our stock price is in free fall." "The child is trying to help us," Sterling said, his voice steady despite the chaos around him. "She's found legal grounds to void the contract." Hartley's laugh was cold. "And what's the cost of this help? You've rehired the janitor, promised college funds, and now you're taking legal advice from a kindergartner. The board has lost confidence in your leadership." Sterling looked around the table at faces he'd known for decades. "Are you calling for a vote of no confidence?" "We're calling for your immediate resignation," said board member Patricia Walsh, a woman who'd built her career on Sterling's recommendations. "The Martinez situation has exposed serious flaws in your judgment. First, you humiliate a family publicly. Then you fire the father out of spite. Now you're letting a child dictate corporate policy." Sterling felt his world tilting. That child may be the only person who can save this company. "That child is a liability," Hartley snapped. "Her mother was a disgruntled employee who was terminated for cause. Now the daughter is manipulating you through guilt and some kind of Stockholm syndrome. It's embarrassing." Sterling stood slowly, his hands shaking with rage. "Maria Martinez was terminated because I was too proud to listen to her warnings. She tried to save us from making the same mistakes we're making now, and I destroyed her career because of my arrogance." The room fell silent. Patricia Walsh leaned forward. "Richard, you're having some kind of breakdown. We're concerned about your mental health." "My mental health?" Sterling's voice rose. "I'm finally seeing clearly for the first time in years. This company survives because of people like Miguel Martinez, who work 16-hour days for poverty wages. It survives because of people like Maria Martinez, who had the courage to speak truth to power, even when they knew they'd be punished for it." Hartley's expression turned vicious. "Spare us the social justice speech, Richard. You're talking about a janitor and a dead cleaning lady. They're not our equals, and pretending otherwise won't save your career." Sterling looked at these men and women who'd built their fortunes on his success and realized they were everything he'd once been: cruel, dismissive, and utterly convinced of their own superiority. "You're right," he said quietly. "They're not our equals. They're better than us. And if you can't see that, then you're going to lose everything." Hartley stood, his face red with anger. "The board votes tomorrow morning. You have 18 hours to resign voluntarily, or we'll remove you by force." As the board members filed out, Sterling sat alone in the massive conference room, surrounded by the trappings of success that suddenly felt like prison bars. His phone buzzed. It was a text from Emma. "Mr. Sterling, I found something important in Mama's notebooks. Can you meet us tonight?" Sterling smiled for the first time in days. The board thought they were removing a weak leader. They had no idea they were about to face a 6-year-old girl who'd inherited her mother's brilliance and her father's unbreakable spirit. That evening, Sterling found himself in a place he'd never imagined visiting, the Martinez family's tiny apartment above Mrs. Chen's laundromat. The contrast to his penthouse was stark: cracked linoleum floors, furniture held together with duct tape, and the persistent smell of industrial detergent from the business below. But the apartment was filled with something his penthouse lacked: love. Family photos covered every surface, and Emma's artwork decorated the refrigerator like treasures in a museum. Miguel had prepared simple sandwiches and coffee, serving them on mismatched plates with the dignity of a 5-star restaurant. Emma sat at the kitchen table, her mother's notebooks spread before her like ancient texts. The leather-bound volumes were filled with Maria's precise handwriting, legal diagrams, and what looked like coded messages only a lawyer would understand. "Mr. Sterling," Emma said, her voice serious, "Mama wrote down everything about the contract she tried to warn you about 6 years ago. She knew you'd make the same mistake again someday." Sterling's chest tightened. "What do you mean?" Emma opened one of the notebooks, revealing pages of analysis about the Henderson contract, the deal that had cost Sterling Industries $50 million. "Mama figured out that the same law firm that made the mistake then is the same one that made the mistake now. It's not an accident." Miguel leaned forward, His weathered face creased with concern. "What are you saying, Mika?" "I'm saying someone at Whitman and Associates has been sabotaging Mr. Sterling's contracts for years. They make little mistakes that cost money, but not enough to get caught, until now." Sterling felt the blood drain from his face. "Harold Whitman has been my lawyer for 15 years. He's like a brother to me." Emma's dark eyes met his. "Mama wrote that the best betrayals come from the people you trust most. She said Mr. Whitman was angry because you got all the credit for deals he negotiated. She heard him talking to other lawyers about how he could teach you a lesson about respecting your legal team." Sterling's mind raced. Harold's strange behavior, his reluctance to challenge certain contract terms, his convenient absences during crucial negotiations. "Do you have proof?" Emma pulled out a small recording device, the kind used for dictation. "Mama recorded a phone call between Mr. Whitman and someone from the Japanese company. She was cleaning his office late one night when she heard him talking." Sterling's hands shook as Emma pressed play. Harold Whitman's voice filled the small apartment, clear and damning. "The subsidiary clause is perfect. Sterling will sign without reading it carefully. He never does. By the time he realizes what happened, we'll have secured our fee and you'll have your assets. Just make sure my consulting payment is transferred to the Cayman account." The recording continued for 10 minutes, detailing a conspiracy that went back years. Harold had been deliberately sabotaging Sterling's contracts, taking payments from competitors, and building his own fortune on Sterling's failures. Miguel broke the silence. "Why didn't Maria report this?" Emma's voice was small and sad. "She tried. She went to the police, but they said it was a civil matter. She went to other lawyers, but they said she was just a jealous employee. She even wrote to the FBI, but they said they needed more evidence." Sterling felt sick. So she kept investigating on her own. "She was going to expose everything," Emma continued. "She had phone records, financial documents, proof of the conspiracy, but then she got sick and she ran out of time." Sterling looked at this remarkable little girl who'd inherited not just her mother's intelligence, but her sense of justice. "Emma, what do you want me to do with this information?" Emma's smile was fierce and beautiful. "I want you to help me finish what Mama started. I want you to help me bring down the people who destroyed her life and tried to destroy yours." Sterling realized he was no longer just fighting for his company. He was fighting for Maria Martinez's memory, for Miguel's dignity, and for Emma's future. The board meeting tomorrow would determine more than just his career. It would determine whether justice could triumph over greed. "Emma," he said, his voice strong for the first time in weeks, "I think it's time we showed Chicago what happens when good people fight back." The Sterling Industries boardroom had never seen anything like it. Richard Sterling sat at the head of the table, flanked by Miguel Martinez in his best suit, and Emma Martinez in her mother's blue dress, now cleaned and pressed. The board members looked confused and irritated by the presence of what they considered to be staff. Chairman Hartley called the meeting to order. "Richard, we're here to formalize your resignation. This circus with the Martinez family has gone on long enough." Sterling smiled calmly. "Actually, William, we're here to discuss Harold Whitman's embezzlement and conspiracy charges." The room exploded into chaos. Hartley banged his gavel. "Richard, you're clearly having a mental breakdown. Harold Whitman is one of Chicago's most respected attorneys." "Harold Whitman is a criminal," Sterling said, his voice cutting through the noise. "And I have proof." Harold Whitman, who'd been sitting quietly in the corner as the board's legal counsel, suddenly looked pale. "Richard, whatever you think you've discovered." "I've discovered that you've been sabotaging my contracts for years," Sterling continued. "The Henderson deal, the Morrison acquisition, the Patterson merger. Every major loss we've suffered in the past decade was orchestrated by you." Emma stood up, her small voice carrying clearly through the room. "Mr. Whitman, my mama recorded your phone calls. She knew you were stealing from Mr. Sterling." Whitman's composure cracked. "That's impossible. Maria Martinez was just a cleaning lady. She couldn't have understood." "She understood perfectly," Emma interrupted. "She was a lawyer just like you, except she was honest." Sterling activated the room's audio system. Maria Martinez's voice filled the boardroom, clear and strong. "This is Maria Martinez, former associate at Patterson and Associates. I'm recording this evidence of ongoing conspiracy between Harold Whitman and foreign entities to defraud Sterling Industries. The recording played for 20 minutes. Phone conversations, financial arrangements, detailed plans to manipulate contracts for personal gain. The board members' faces went from confusion to shock to horror as they realized the scope of Whitman's betrayal. But the most damning evidence came last. Harold's voice, recorded just weeks before Maria's death. The Martinez woman is getting too close to the truth. She's been asking questions about the Henderson contract. We need to make sure she can't cause trouble. What are you suggesting? Came another voice. Nothing illegal, just make sure she knows her place. A little harassment, maybe some threats about her employment. People like her usually get the message. Emma's voice was steady as she addressed the room. That's why Mama was so scared in her final months. She knew Mr. Whitman was trying to silence her, but she kept investigating anyway because she wanted to protect good people like Mr. Sterling. Whitman stood suddenly, his face flushed with rage. This is all fabricated. A desperate man and a delusional child cooking up fantasies to save a failing company. Is it? Sterling pulled out a folder. Because the FBI has been very interested in your Cayman Island accounts, Harold. Turns out they've been investigating international money laundering, and your name came up in several transactions. Whitman's eyes darted toward the door. You can't prove anything. Emma stepped forward, her small hands holding a thick manila envelope. Actually, we can. Mama kept copies of everything. Bank records, email exchanges, phone logs. She even photographed the contracts before and after you changed them. The room fell silent as Emma spread the evidence across the conference table. Years of meticulous investigation by a dying woman who'd been dismissed as just a cleaning lady. Whitman's shoulders sagged in defeat. You don't understand. Sterling got all the credit while I did all the work. I deserved compensation for my brilliance. You deserved to be fired, Sterling said coldly. But instead, you chose to become a thief. As security escorted Whitman from the building, Chairman Hartley looked at Sterling with new respect. Richard, I owe you an apology, we all do. Sterling looked at Emma, who was carefully organizing her mother's papers. You don't owe me anything, William, but you owe that little girl a debt of gratitude. She just saved this company from complete destruction. Emma looked up, her eyes bright with unshed tears. Mama always said the truth would win eventually. She just didn't get to see it happen. Sterling knelt beside her chair. She's seeing it now, Emma, and she's proud of you. 3 weeks later, Sterling Industries was a different company. The Nakamura contract had been successfully voided due to the overwhelming evidence of fraud, and Sterling had negotiated a new deal that was actually more profitable than the original. The stock price had not only recovered, but reached an all-time high. But the real changes went deeper than numbers on a financial statement. Sterling stood in what had once been a storage room on the 15th floor, now transformed into the Maria Martinez Memorial Education Center. The space was filled with computers, legal books, and educational materials. A bronze plaque by the door read, "Dedicated to the memory of Maria Martinez, lawyer, mother, and champion of justice." Emma sat at one of the computers, working on her first formal legal research project. She'd been enrolled in an advanced gifted program, but she spent her afternoons at Sterling Industries, learning from the company's legal team and contributing insights that amazed seasoned attorneys. Miguel had been promoted to head of facility operations, overseeing a team of maintenance workers who were now paid living wages and received full benefits. He wore a suit to work now, but he still insisted on personally cleaning Sterling's office every morning, not because he had to, but because he wanted to. "Mr. Sterling," Emma said, looking up from her research, "I've been reading about corporate social responsibility. I think we should start a program to help other kids whose parents work in service jobs." Sterling smiled, settling into a chair beside her. "What kind of program? After-school tutoring, college preparation, maybe even internships. Mama always said that talent exists everywhere, but opportunity doesn't. We could change that." Sterling felt his chest swell with pride. "Emma, that's a brilliant idea. Let's make it happen." As they worked together on the proposal, Sterling reflected on how much his life had changed. The board had unanimously voted to keep him as CEO, but more importantly, They'd voted to implement comprehensive changes to how the company treated its employees. Fair wages, educational opportunities, and a promise that every voice would be heard, regardless of job title. Miguel entered the office carrying a tray of coffee and Emma's favorite cookies. "How's the project going?" "Papa, we're creating the Emma Martinez Scholarship Fund," Emma said excitedly. "It's going to help kids like me go to college, even if their families don't have money." Miguel's eyes filled with tears. "Emma, that's beautiful. But why are you naming it after yourself?" Emma's expression grew serious. "Because I want people to remember that sometimes the smallest voices have the biggest truths. I want other kids to know that it doesn't matter where you come from, it matters where you're going." Sterling watched the interaction between father and daughter, seeing the love and pride that no amount of money could buy. He thought about his own relationship with his father, built on fear and competition rather than support and encouragement. "Emma," he said quietly, "would you like to come to the board meeting next week? I'm presenting the new employee welfare programs, and I think they should hear from the person who inspired them." Emma's face lit up. "Really? I get to talk to the important people?" "You are the important people," Sterling said. "You're the most important person in this company." As the sun set over Chicago, Sterling looked out at the city he'd once viewed as something to conquer. Now he saw it as something to serve. The transformation wasn't just about his company, it was about his soul. Emma had taught him that true success wasn't measured in dollars, but in the lives you touched and the positive changes you created. Maria Martinez had died believing that justice would eventually prevail. Thanks to her remarkable daughter, she'd been absolutely right. Tomorrow would bring new challenges, but Sterling faced them with something he'd never had before, a clear conscience and the knowledge that he was finally the man he was meant to be. 5 years later, the Sterling Industries Auditorium was packed with Chicago's most influential business leaders, but all eyes were on the young woman at the podium. Emma Martinez, now 11 years old, stood before the crowd with the same fierce intelligence that had once intimidated a billionaire, but now tempered with grace and wisdom beyond her years. "Ladies and gentlemen," Emma began, her voice clear and strong, "today marks the 5th anniversary of the Maria Martinez Foundation, and I want to tell you about the woman who started it all, my mama." Sterling watched from the front row, his heart swelling with pride. Beside him sat Miguel, now Sterling Industries Vice President of Community Relations, wearing a suit that had been tailored rather than bought off the rack. The transformation in both father and daughter was remarkable, but it was Emma who had truly amazed everyone. 5 years ago, Emma continued, "my mama died believing that smart people from poor families would always be kept down by rich people who were afraid of losing their power. She thought that justice was something that happened to other people, not people like us." The audience was completely silent, hanging on every word from this extraordinary young woman who had become Chicago's most famous advocate for educational equality. "But Mama was wrong about one thing," Emma said, her voice growing stronger. "She thought that people couldn't change, that the rich would always step on the poor, and that someone like me would never get a fair chance. She never got to see that even the meanest person can become good if they're willing to admit their mistakes and work to fix them." Emma's eyes found Sterling in the crowd. "Mr. Sterling was the meanest person I ever met. He threw money at my feet and called me a street rat. He destroyed my mama's career and made her feel worthless. But when he realized what he'd done, he didn't just say sorry. He spent 5 years proving that he was sorry." Sterling felt tears on his cheeks, remembering that night 5 years ago when a 6-year-old girl had offered him redemption he didn't deserve. The Maria Martinez Foundation has now provided college scholarships to over 300 students from working families. We've built 24 community learning centers in Chicago's poorest neighborhoods. We've created job training programs that have helped over 1,000 parents move from minimum wage work to skilled careers. The audience erupted in applause, but Emma raised her hand for silence. "But the most important thing we've done is prove that intelligence and goodness exist everywhere. In janitors and cleaning ladies, in kids who live above laundromats, in people who count crumpled dollar bills and dream of something better. We've proven that when you give people a chance, they don't just succeed, they soar." Emma paused, looking out at the crowd of powerful people who now listened to her with respect instead of dismissal. Next month, I'll be starting high school at Northwestern University as part of their accelerated program. I'll be studying international law, just like my mama did. But I'll also be continuing my work with the foundation, because I know that there are other kids out there like me. Kids whose parents clean offices and fix things and serve food. Kids who are told they're not smart enough or good enough or worthy enough to dream big dreams. Sterling stood up, unable to contain his emotion. The entire audience followed his lead, giving Emma a standing ovation that lasted for 5 minutes. When the applause finally died down, Emma's voice carried across the auditorium one final time. My mama never got to see me graduate from high school or college. She never got to see me become a lawyer or help other families like ours. But she did get to see the most important thing. She got to see that love is stronger than hate, that truth is more powerful than money, and that sometimes the smallest voice can change the biggest heart. Emma looked directly at Sterling, her eyes bright with unshed tears. Thank you, Mr. Sterling, for letting a little girl teach you that we're all worthy of dignity and respect. Thank you for proving that change is possible, even when it seems impossible. And thank you for helping me keep my mama's dream alive. After the ceremony, Sterling found Emma in the foundation's offices, surrounded by college applications and scholarship requests. She was reviewing a proposal from a young man whose father worked as a dishwasher and whose mother cleaned hotel rooms. His test scores are incredible, Emma said, showing Sterling the application. But he's been told he can't afford college. Sound familiar? Sterling smiled, thinking of Maria Martinez's lost opportunities and Emma's unlimited potential. Very familiar. What do you think we should do? I think we should give him a full scholarship to Northwestern, with mentoring and support services. I think we should show him that where you come from doesn't determine where you can go. Sterling nodded, signing the approval form. Emma, I have something for you. He handed her a small velvet box. Inside was a simple gold necklace with a pendant shaped like a scale, the symbol of justice. It belonged to your mother, Sterling said quietly. She left it in her desk at Patterson & Associates. I tracked it down and had it cleaned and repaired, I thought she would want you to have it. Emma's hands trembled as she lifted the necklace. She wore this every day when she was working as a lawyer. She said it reminded her why she chose law instead of business, because justice was more important than profit. Sterling helped her put on the necklace, and Emma touched the pendant with reverence. Mr. Sterling, she said, do you ever wonder what would have happened if you'd listened to Mama that night at the office? Sterling considered the question. I think about it every day. I think about how different her life might have been, how much pain could have been avoided. But then I think about you, and about all the kids we've helped, and I realize that sometimes the worst mistakes lead to the most beautiful redemption. Emma smiled, the same fierce, brilliant smile that had once challenged a billionaire's cruelty. Mama always said that God uses broken things to make something beautiful. I think she was right. As they worked together in the foundation offices, with the Chicago skyline glittering beyond the windows, Sterling marveled at the journey that had brought them here. A 6-year-old girl had looked at his contract and seen errors that Harvard-trained lawyers had missed. But more than that, she'd looked at his heart and seen possibilities that he'd never imagined. Emma Martinez had saved more than Sterling Industries. She'd saved Richard Sterling's soul, and in doing so, had created a legacy of hope that would impact generations of children yet to come. The girl who had once been dismissed as a street rat was now Chicago's youngest advocate for educational equality, and the man who had once thrown money at her feet was now her proudest supporter. Together, they'd proven that the most powerful force in the world isn't money or status or power. It's the courage to stand up for what's right, even when you're the smallest person in the room. Maria Martinez's dream had finally come true. Justice had prevailed, love had conquered hate, and her daughter was soaring higher than she'd ever dared to imagine. The little girl who had learned to read contracts from her brilliant mother was now rewriting the rules of what was possible for kids like her, and in the end that was the greatest victory of all.